And good Wednesday morning. It is Wednesday, February 19th, just past 11 a.m. And we are getting back to our conversations. January was very long, 5 weeks, but somehow I missed what week we were supposed to have our guests on. It was also just getting launched for the new year and all of that. But we are back. Newport City Manager Colin Kennedy. Colin, how are you?
Good, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Good.
You mentioned January was long. One of our state representatives wondered around the end of the month if it felt like January 700th, and I think she was right. So
Yeah.
it was long.
What's funny is every Wednesday I'm like, oh, Colin's on next week, and then we finally got to the fifth one. I'm like, oh no, there's not a sixth. I don't know what's going on. So, how about the first 6 weeks, 7 weeks of the year?
It's been good. We're into our General Assembly legislative session now, so we're having starting with the kickoff meeting we had in early January with our General Assembly delegation members. We have had the opportunity to engage with both them and the council and our lobbying consultants for the past 6 weeks, and that'll be ongoing for the remainder of the General Assembly session. But that's been a little bit of the preliminary focus here is making sure that we get off to a good start in terms of advocating on behalf of the council what the city's priorities are with the General Assembly. So that's going well. There should be some resolutions coming forward from the council, I think, in the next coming weeks, and the council is driving those, and I'm very proud of them for doing that, and look forward to some of the. Basically, what they're doing is they're letting the governor's office and the General Assembly delegation and the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns and other organizations that have municipal towns and cities backs. They're letting them know what their priorities are so that they can hopefully dovetail with other towns and cities' priorities, and ultimately results in positive change at the General Assembly level. So we're excited about that. That's been the focus for the first 6 weeks of the year, and it's been going well.
I don't want to spend too much time on it because of you can't control it. But how much are you watching what happens on a federal level?
We watch it more closely than you might think. I'm a very apolitical beast. I work for a council regardless of party affiliation. They're all nonpartisan to begin with. And so, when you make a career out of doing that, which I did in the military as well, you learn how to kind of roll with the punches. So I don't take a position publicly on whether I agree or disagree with what's going on in Washington. Our job is just to respond to it constructively and positively, and do what's in the best interest of the city based on the administration that we have in place at any given time. So that's how we're looking at it, and we're going to make the best of it. Sometimes you change the word happy to glad in a communication, knowing that how it's received by the other end might be different that way. So we're taking some strategic approaches to how we communicate. But other than that, we're just rolling with the punches, and we will make the best of it for the city of Newport.
And just to clarify, I guess my question was, funding as well as staffing at Naval Station Newport, are those concerns of yours? But you say that you are watching that.
Yeah, they are definitely concerns. I think we have entered a period of a greater and heightened sense of urgency because there is a concern that some of these federal funding pipelines from grants and congressional awards that we've become accustomed to might slow down or be canceled. And so it's definitely in the interest of the residents of Newport for us to work quickly to try to obligate some of those funds before any executive or presidential action is taken to curtail them. We may or may not be successful. We're working as quickly as we can. But that's kind of the focus of effort right now is things that we already have a lot of groundwork laid on to try to drive those to completion so we can secure those funds and protect them from any future curtailment.
From your point of view, this just popped in my head, but you haven't heard any changes for the plans for the NOAA venue there?
No, I have not.
I'm sure Senator
by all
Jack
accounts,
will
that
be
project will
confident.
continue in its current form.
Excellent. Just want to go back to the start of the year. You have an assistant. You have a deputy city manager. Wondering how that's going and what he's working on, what people could expect from him.
Yeah, that's great. I actually wanted to introduce him today, but coincidentally, he's actually out at the Navy hospital site right now, taking a tour of the facility. And we didn't want to miss the opportunity that the Navy gave us to that, so I'll try to have him on in March. But yeah, Deputy Manager Mike Carullo, former Newport Police Department Lieutenant for 22 years, then worked at Salve Regina University for about 11 years, primarily in security, but also in community relations. And that really set him, both of those experiences really set him up well to serve as a deputy city manager for the city. In his own words, he said, I'm true to Newport. I've been a Newporter my entire life. And I feel like I have some unfinished business in terms of service to the city. So we're really excited to have him. He's mostly working on, and by no means do I say this to kind of diminish his capacity, but he's really helping me work on things like day-to-day constituent affairs and day-to-day operations and some of the lower hanging fruit that our residents, that is really things that are massively interesting to our residents, but not necessarily something that I have the bandwidth to devote hours on end to, while still keeping an eye on the ball of the strategic direction of the city. So Mike is, much like any good assistant, he's helping out with some of the minutia so that the broader city manager's office, myself and him included, can really spend more time devoted to long-range planning, strategic thinking, things of that nature. The synergy between the two of us so far has been outstanding. Mike is just a fantastic human being, and so that really helps. And he's been a great addition to the city. I'm really proud of the city council for recognizing the demands that have been placed on this office. This motion was put in place before I arrived, and so it wasn't something that I demanded or asked for. They saw it. They saw this train coming before I arrived, and it would have been in place regardless of who was hired as the city manager. So they recognize that in a city with an equivalent full-time population of about 100,000 people, that's when you factor in all the visitors and the seasonal residents and equate the impact they have if they were here full-time. This is not a city of 25,000. It's really like a city of 100,000, and it needs the kind of city staff to really meet the demands of that kind of footprint. And Mike is really a genuine asset to help us do that going forward.
You brought it up. This is why we have a conversation. What is the latest at the Naval Hospital?
Yeah, so we're actually having an executive session. There's real estate transactions involved, so I can't divulge too much of that information, but the council is going to meet to start to talk about that. What I can say is that we have had extensive discussions that have really kind of taken off in the last 6 months between the Navy's Base Realignment and Closure Office and Naval Facilities Engineering Command Mid-Atlantic. Those are the two entities responsible for the property and ultimately its conveyance and disposal and its environmental remediation. So we are making some good strides about leaning in, getting closer to a period where both parties agree on instructions to appraise the property and ultimately lean into a potential negotiated sale of the property or some kind of effort where we maybe lease part of the property and purchase the rest. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get into the weeds of the real estate, details, but I do want our residents to know that we are making excellent progress on that property. Probably some of the best that we've made since the last 9 or 10 years when we've been working on this. And that's largely because the Navy is bringing to bear a desire to move on this more so than they ever have before. So we're excited about the prospect for fresh public access to the waterfront that we haven't had before in the North End. We're excited about the potential prospect, probably several years from now, of something to do with the properties along that area, in terms of like technological and blue economy development. It all factors into the broader picture of the North End urban plan and the development of that area. So we're excited about the prospects and looking forward to moving on that effort with greater speed soon.
You kind of answered the question, but because it's our first meeting of 2025, I wonder if we could play a quick update game. It sounds like 2025 we'll see some progress there with the Naval Hospital.
Yeah, I think it will. I don't want our residents to think that we're going to have all the answers this year and that there's going to be a whole lot of construction going on there, or suddenly fences are going to be taken down. That is less than likely, but the behind the scenes action of actually getting, the State Historic Preservation Office and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management and the Navy and the BRAC office and all the parties to start to really agree on what needs to be done there, and so that it allows Newport to have some skin in the game for the first time in a long time. I think that's a positive development in and of itself. And I would say that probably I really sincerely hope that in the next 2 years, we're going to see some access to that site that the public has not seen before. So I'm very, very excited about that. It's a tremendous movement in the right direction.
Just sticking with the 2025, you think it's the year we see some progress in the north end and with its property?
I'll give a similar answer to that one. Yes, there will be progress. How much of it will be visible remains to be seen. What I can say is that we have now with the Coastal Resources Management Council and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, that's CRMC and RIDEM, we have established a working group between some key stakeholders in those two organizations as well as the city. We're going to have some council representation in that working group as well. And what we're really moving towards is the idea of what's called master permitting, where essentially you consolidate all of the permitting that's required to move that area forward under one umbrella, a master permitting authority. That worked really well with the I-195 corridor, and you may know that the same person who chairs our ad hoc bridge realignment commission, Mr. Colin Kane, also was heavily involved in that project. So we're very thankful to have Mr. Kane's expertise on board with the ad hoc commission, and he's also on this working group and really helping us use his experience to do something similar for the north end. So progress, yes. Will it be entirely visible? Remains to be seen. But I can say with certainty to our residents that there is a lot of movement happening at least in the office and the boardroom level that wasn't happening before, and we're very excited about that, and we're very thankful for the cooperation of CRMC and RIDEM in moving this forward.
Do you think with that progress that we will see some resolution with Admiral Calfus Road?
So there's going to be some things you're going to see on Admiral Calfus Road in the coming months that were always going to be put in place. It's just a matter of when RIDOT is able to schedule the work with their contractors, because they have a contractor group, and those individual contractors do different projects around the state, and they try to schedule them so that they're not bouncing back and forth across the state. So at some point when they might happen to be doing some work on Aquidneck Island, they're likely to complete the actions they've already promised on Calfus, which is to say the rectangular rapid flashing beacon pedestrian light at Sagamore are going to go up. The advisory speed signs are going to go up in 2 different sets, one on each side of Hillside, that will remind vehicles who are speeding how fast they're speeding. It won't issue tickets, but it sends that reminder to a driver to say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was going that fast, and the tendency is to slow down. So actions like that are in the works. Where we kind of ran into a roadblock is on the establishment of the bike lane, which would hopefully lead to the establishment of Class 7 and up truck restrictions. So we're working with Middletown on that. We're working with RIDOT on that. We had a meeting with RIDOT and Director Alviti, and I think it was very professional. It was a good meeting. I wouldn't say that it necessarily went the way that we in Newport wanted it to go, but it did provide direction for some additional study that RIDOT feels like it needs to really get a complete and comprehensive picture of that corridor. They have studies and data in the past, but what the problem we're seeing is that a lot of that data is from disparate times. So you end up comparing apples to oranges instead of apples to apples. So what we have from July of 2017 is a comprehensive study specifically of Class 7 and up truck traffic on that corridor. We need a corresponding study at a similar time of year, because as we know, commercial traffic on Aquidneck Island is very seasonally variable. So RIDOT has promised to do that study in July. The other aspect they want to see is a comprehensive view of what they call an origin and destination study. In other words, where are the trucks coming from and where are they going to? What is their through routes? So that information can be made available not only to Newport, but also to Middletown to address some of the concerns that they have with the Middletown Town Center development that they're working on in Middletown at the corner of Coddington and West Main. So this is all interrelated. I know it's I will say that the engineers who gave us the option for the bike lane last August, in retrospect, talking with Director Alviti, and I don't want to throw them under the bus. I don't think they had any ill intentions, but he did not know of that promise. And I think reading his body language in the room, I think he felt like it was probably a premature promise. And so the council ended up enacting a resolution saying, hey, we want to take this option, when in fact the director of RIDOT was unaware of it and likely would have disapproved. So he kind of put a steady break on that and said, we're not saying no yet, but we're saying we've had experiences in the past where we've made an action on behalf of one city or town and then had second and third order unintended consequences in another city or town that was adjacent to it. And it's burned them before, and he just doesn't want to, he wants to make sure it doesn't burn them here too. So so what he's doing is directing these two additional studies, the apples to apples traffic comparison and the origin destination study for those large trucks. And once that data is available at the end of the summer, it will be analyzed, and then additional decisions can be made about the potential for truck restrictions in that corridor. I know it's not what the residents on Calthus want, and I'm very entirely empathetic and sympathetic to their concerns. I live right around the corner on Broadway from there, and I get it. It's not fun. So what I hope they will take from that is that we're making some good progress. It's not quite as fast as we want, and there are some other measures that have no impact on Middletown whatsoever that are going into place very soon. That being the pedestrian signs and the speed and the speed advisement signs. So there are some positive developments coming in that corridor.
I want people to know that I bring up these topics because I get emails, I get a lot of questions from them. Yep. These topics get brought up at city council meetings. So if you don't watch city council meetings or school committee meetings or any other public meeting, a lot of these topics come up. One thing I do want to note, because I think sometimes if people do tune into a city council meeting or a school committee meeting and they see the public forum section, and they see people get up and talk about Rogers or talk about Admiral Calthus, and you see yourself or city council just sit there and not respond. I just want to remind people that because a public forum, people are allowed to spend their 3 minutes talking about anything that's not on the agenda, but the public officials cannot respond to it because it's not on the agenda. So they're not listening and then have nothing to say about it. It's just they publicly can't make a statement or do anything about it. So it's more of a public forum listening and not a public forum conversation. So sometimes I think that gets lost, and it looks like, oh, well, they don't care, they're just talking. But I just wanted to take this moment to put that out there. No,
I'm glad you brought that up too, because yeah, it's not as though the counselors are up there just, it's not going in one ear and out the other. In effect, what that citizens forum has the opportunity to do is perhaps to plant a seed in a counselor's head about an issue that they may not have been thinking of before, which if they either hear that repeatedly or it strikes a particular chord, can get that counselor to maybe consider talking with his or her colleagues about the potential for a workshop or some other kind of public forum, or maybe an ordinance revision that needs to be placed on a future docket. So it is certainly not time wasted. And I'm glad you brought that up. The counselors do listen. They do take that under advisement. It's just that because of the limited amount of time we have for a council meeting, 15 minutes are dedicated to the citizens forum. They receive that information verbally. Some of them write notes, some of them keep it, mentally, but it's just not the time for a give and take because it wasn't on the agenda.
Last city council meeting, speaking of, I'll have you stop projecting what you think is going to happen in 2025, because that's never a good idea. But last council meeting was a long one, a little bit over 3 hours. Obviously, the big takeaways or big news items was regarding an Easton's Beach contract. There was the camera on Ruggles. Wonder what your big takeaways were.
Yeah, my big takeaways were this council is very focused, and every council is different. The metaphor I use is many managers in baseball refer to a baseball team as like a soup, where it's the same soup every year but with different ingredients. Same thing with the council. Every council has a little bit of a different take on how they want to govern and execute. And I think this one is very focused on, respectfully, very focused on transparency. What I'm saying is I very much respect that transparency and openness, and they're a little bit heavier on the needle when it comes to decision making. So I'm taking cues from that as I kind of learn their nuances. recognizing that I think a little bit more is expected of me in terms of like some of the more nuanced decisions going to them for decision. Also, I think what they're indicating to me very fairly is that we have a few policies or perhaps lack thereof within the city administration that we could tighten up. A good example, talking about the beach contract for 1899 LLC for the beach concessions contract. That was an option. And what we don't have is a really, we don't have a really detailed purchasing policy or ordinance in the city that I think is something that over the years we just kind of became complacent on. But we really need to have that either at least in a policy, if not in an ordinance, so that everybody's on the same page in terms of if a contract, we know that a contract or a contract amendment needs to go in front of the council. What has traditionally been the case is that when you have an option, like an option year, for example, if there are no changes, that does not need to go in front of council. And what happened in this case is that for years, the Easton's Beach Snack Bar had I think several 5-year contracts with several option years built in, and those options were just taken as a matter of routine business time after time after time by the beach department. Well, a new vendor came in, and what they had proposed was no change to the pricing structure, which is what I think everybody was focused on, because typically when you think someone's going to change something, they're going to change money. What we overlooked inadvertently was the fact that they had made a subtle inclusion of a change to the operating hours. The previous contract, the initial contract, which was sort of rushed last year because of the demolition of the snack bar, basically said that from May 15th until the end of September, the vendor shall operate at all times. And what the vendor wanted to do, which was commensurate with the request for proposals when they had initially submitted, was to have a little bit of flexibility in the early and the late part of the season when the weather may or may not be as good. For example, on a cold, rainy day in the early part of June, it might not be in their best interest to open the concession stand if they know they're not going to have any visitors and any revenue from that. So they wanted a little bit of flexibility to have some ability to say when they're not going to be open if the weather is going to be terrible. So they kind of put that in the offer for the option year, and it was overlooked, and it made its way up to the purchasing department, where, because we had a gap in the purchasing officer position, it got set on a desk and dropped for a while, which is why it was actually never signed. So as you can see, there's some seams there that as a city administration we recognize we need to clean those up. We need to clean up the process to make it more defined when a contract option needs to go in front of council, and we also need to make sure that documents don't get set on a desk and overlooked, because that results in embarrassment later. It was certainly not anyone's intention. No one came to work one day saying, "Ha, I'm going to leave this contract on the table and make a big deal out of it." But it just demonstrates the fact that we need a more complete purchasing policy. And I'm happy to announce that our director of finance and other members of the city administration staff are working on that right now, so that we can get that in front of council and have it solidified, so that we don't have to have every single contract option go in front of council. That's the expectation right now. We'll honor that for the time being, but we'd like to make it crystal clear so that we all have a common piece of a common sheet of music to be operating from.
I also want to point out to everything, all those opportunities to get it right there that you mentioned. It also didn't help, and it's not, if it was the first time, I wouldn't mention it, but this has happened now where council has had to respond to, I hate to call it news headlines that are just complete lies and sensationalism that sometimes drum up these resolutions or reaction from the public or reaction from council. And we try to go on do no harm and facts matter. And it doesn't help when stuff is getting spread out there that the contract has been signed and the contract is sitting on a desk not signed.
Right. Those to be fair, those facts were not followed up on by the journalists who wrote about them. So unfortunately, misinformation or incorrect information is just a part of life. It's 2025. It's out there. It is what it is. I refuse to lose a lot of sleep to that type of thing. I just come to work every day, work with my staff to try to do the best job on any given day that we can. And we're aware of and sensitive to media inquiries. Responsible journalists do their job and ask tough questions and hold their governments accountable. And I'm no different. So I expect that. I welcome it. I may not always like the tone, but but I respect it. There's a certain right of free speech that's involved, and a right of a free press to ask questions. But to some extent, are sometimes the questions not as well vetted as they could be, or not as thoroughly researched. I'd say that's probably the case. But again, it's 2025. This is the era in which we live, and I can't complain about that. I just have to do the best I can to work within the scope of the environment that we're in. So I will continue to do so, and my staff will continue to do so as professionally as possible.
And it's on all of us, both. And I say this as a publisher, but it's on readers as well to expect more, and locally, nationally, and to read as many sources as you can, and to make sure that stuff is being sourced. But one of the other big items that got some attention last week was this talk about a camera, speed camera, yes, in the third ward, Ruggles, Harrison. Help me understand what happened here.
Yeah, in summary, the chronology goes back to October of 2023. There was a resolution. So I'll point out that this was like 9 months before. It was before I even applied for the job. But October of 2023 was when the initial resolution from council to address safety on Admiral Kalfas Boulevard came out. And within that was a request, among many other things, which, as I mentioned earlier, are some of them have come and some of them are still coming, was a request for a speed camera inside the school zone as permitted by state law there, within a quarter mile of Pell School. And at the time, I believe it was Councilor Carlin suggested and was ultimately approved to have an amendment to put a camera on Harrison Avenue to address concerns that he felt he had been hearing from his constituents in the third ward. This amendment was approved. Councilor Carlin then ended up hearing politely, I guess pushback is the right way, from his constituents, and went to the police department and said, "Hey, I may have acted a little too quickly here. Can we not put the camera on Harrison Avenue?" And the police department at the time, Chief Duffy and his team said, "Okay, you were the sponsor of the amendment, so we respect that, and we'll look for another. We'll do some traffic studies, use some professional judgment, and ultimately find out a different place in the third ward for that camera to go to. That's still within a quarter mile of Rogers High School, as is required by state law." So that location was ultimately determined through all of that study, professional analysis, concerns of the neighbors over the summer in the area of Carroll and Ruggles and some of the streets that you heard about over the summer, where they felt like there were a lot of incidences of speeding. There was a lot of data to back that up. They used data in this decision as well. So careful analysis ended up resulting in where the placement in Ruggles is being approved. Councilor Carlin was aware of this through verbal communications with the police department. When it went up, when it actually physically was constructed and placed, I think there started to be some pushback from his constituents, and so out of a sense of regret, I think we wanted to have that camera removed. It's a little bit disappointing from the police department's perspective, because they really thought they were acting in the council's intent to meet the intent of traffic safety in the third ward, dating back to the resolution from October of 2023. So they felt they had the guidance they needed to put the camera where it was placed. And evidently what the council is basically saying is there should have been a resolution. I pointed out at the meeting, I'm like, well, that's fine, but I would also point out that an amendment to the resolution in October of 23 not to have the camera on Harrison was also never proffered. So, it's confusing to the administration. Which way do you want to have it? Do you need a resolution, or do you not need a resolution? Do you need to come to the city manager or the council, or do you need to just speak with the police department? So it's a little bit confusing. It's frustrating for staff. We hope that in the future efforts will be made to communicate this through the city manager's office, so that we can be on the same page and not have these issues in the future.
I have two quick follow-ups on that. There is a resolution that has not been rescinded for camera on Harrison. Does that have to be drawn back, or can it just be fixed?
I think it's pretty clear that the camera is not wanted on Harrison. I would have to defer to the council on that to determine if they feel it's necessary to have that formally removed by resolution. But you're right. The standing resolution that has never been withdrawn or superseded does technically indicate that a camera belongs on Harrison between between a certain set of addresses. I forget the exact numbers, but there's there's an address window where that camera was desired to be placed on Harrison. It has never officially been withdrawn or superseded. But I'm not putting one there.
Well, I was just wondering.
I believe that intent is very clear to me. Yep.
Yeah. And then this is just something I was thinking while I was watching the meeting last week. Chief Ryan Duffy is the director of public safety for the city. And I guess my general question is he can't just decide to do any of this on his own. He needs council approval.
Correct. And he felt like he had that. He felt like the intent of council from the October 23 resolution and communications with the sponsor of the amendment from the third ward from that same resolution. Between those two things, he felt like he felt like the intent was clear that a camera was desired in the third ward. It was communicated that an alternate location would be chosen, and that location was ultimately revealed. But not until the actual construction of the physical structure of the camera pole did the public consternation return. So that's what led us to the resolution from the previous meeting, where it was decided to remove that camera. Now, I will say that the docket that's going to come out tomorrow is likely to have a resolution in it requesting to reconsider the removal of that camera. Because if you remember, that resolution had a couple of elements to it. One was the removal of the camera, but the other was the convention of a meeting of residents in the southern part of the city to talk about broader issues about traffic safety and speed and other types of issues that are occurring there. And so I think after the meeting and upon consideration, many councilors thought to themselves, wait a minute, what if we find out from these meetings in the southern part of the city that in fact the camera is wanted? And then we've wasted $90,000 removing it when we may not have needed to. So I think the resolution or the amended resolution that's going to be proffered for that meeting will say, let's leave the camera in place. It doesn't cost us anything to leave it there dormant and doing nothing while we have the opportunity to meet with residents and truly get a feel for what their desires are in terms of enforcement of traffic safety and speed violations in that part of the city, which I think, the council will decide what they want to decide. But if they decide that, I think it's a sensible compromise to the current challenge we face down there.
You mentioned it, and I just want to clarify for everybody who's like, the camera is going to stay there. It is doing nothing. It is not sending tickets based on the city.
Correct.
So it's you're not going to get tickets from now until they decide what to do.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, at the point of the meeting last week, the camera was operating, but all it was doing was recording data. Because at some point the police have to figure out what kind of thresholds they want to set for where they issue warnings and where they issue violations. And so they were using the cameras to get data, but no actual warnings or violations were being processed. And now that we have the resolution to remove the camera, we certainly won't be doing that. In fact, the camera will just simply go dormant altogether until such time as we figure out its ultimate disposition.
I'm already over time, so I'm going to try to go a little quicker on a couple of quick items before we get to some important ones. You sit on the school building committee as the city manager.
Yes.
Updates on Rogers. How are we looking? It's going to open this year?
It is. A certificate of occupancy is going to be issued before the end of June. We are on track with the construction to meet that timeline, which will allow the facility to undergo final cleanup and be ready for students in the fall. I had a chance to take a tour of the facility 2 weeks ago. It was the first time I'd been in there since I started the job. When I started, it was still just kind of skull and bones, and now it's got a lot of meat to it, and it's really progressing quickly. Much of the drywall is up, especially in the upper floors. The gym is complete. All of the apparatus is installed with the exception of the wood floor, but that's going in March. So the final pieces are really starting to fall into place. The auditorium is mostly built out. There's a nice big stage on it. The chairs are going in. So yeah, it's getting very, very close. I mean, you can tell it's on track for completion by the advertised date, and will be ready in the fall for students. What comes after that's not it. Now we have to demolish the old school and fill in those voids that are left behind. So that's coming next. So it won't be like in June, all the earth moving and the construction stops. we still have to go retrofill, demolish and retrofill the old structures. But the school will be available for students starting in September. We're very excited to welcome the inaugural classes into that building.
And to help with some clarification, responsible now for the school project as well as after when knocking down the old school, responsible for that will be the school building committee as well as the school committee.
Correct. And the demolition is covered. That was part of the cost of the project. So it's not like they need more money just to demolish the building. That's all part of the already agreed upon funding. If there is any additional funding needed either for that, or there's an effort among the school committee to potentially save the NACTAC building, which was originally scheduled for demolition. If there are any additional funds needed for that, certainly the school committee will have to come to the city council to request those funds. And what we will address it, the city council will address that at that time. But for now, everything is on track with the funding that's available for the project, and no additional funding other than what the last commitment was made in, I believe it was December, might have been November. One of those meetings in November, December, the final commitment of, I think, approximately 2.9 million was given by the council. None of the invoices for that money are in yet. So we have time to figure out from what pots of city funds that money will come from, whether it's unrestricted fund balance or whether it's from rebates that we get through unspent contingency funds. Might not need the whole 2.9 million when it's all said and done. But the good news is we have time to figure that out, which means we don't have to make rash decisions that it can be better made tomorrow. But the commitment is there one way or another to provide that funding that the school building committee and the school committee need to finish the project. And all of that, by the way, that I just mentioned is exclusive of any effort to save the NACTAC building. That, if it comes to fruition, would require additional funds. The construction management team is working on an estimate for what that would cost. It's not really the building itself. The building itself is in good shape. It's older, but it's in solid shape. It's got good bones. What they would need to do is reroute some utility lines that had initially been thought that we're going to go right through that building area. But if there's a building there, they'll have to reroute those utility lines around that building. And so effectively what we're paying for is the cost of doing that in order to save the building.
I have a quick question that just popped into my head. Last November, voters approved the 98.98 million bond. Every time money is spent from that bond, it has to go in front of city council. I'll just preface that quickly. Have we started going for that, or is that in an upcoming budget, or when do we start spending that money?
Yeah, we haven't sold any of those bonds yet, and there's a reason for that. It's once you have approval to sell bonds, then you have to be very tactical about when you do that, because you want to optimize the interest rates that you get, and you also have only 3 years to spend money on any individual allocated project while you're receiving interest on anything that you haven't spent. So if we sell, like, let's say half the bonds, right? Let's say we sell $45 million worth of bonds and begin paying interest on that. We can, until we actually need to obligate that money by city council decree, we can keep that in an interest-bearing account. But we can only do that for 3 years before federal law requires that to become taxed. So they're tax exempt for 3 years, but then after that, that interest gets taxed. So if you buy the bonds too quickly and then you don't use it fast enough, you end up taxing yourself down the road. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to optimize the interest and avoid paying unnecessary taxes on the interest that we get from putting that money into interest-bearing accounts. So long story short, we're getting close. We think in the next few months we'll be starting to sell some bonds. We got to figure out what we need in the short term versus what we might need in the long term. Short term thing, I'm thinking of things like Parati Park and the bulkhead, because we know that the situation is fairly dire down there. Knock on wood, we've been very lucky and haven't had any super powerful storms this winter. But that's still a very threatened piece of infrastructure, and we'll likely need to sell some bonds sooner rather than later to accommodate and begin to obligate funds towards that project. Conversely, you look at something like the Van Zant Bridge. That work has a lot of research left to be done and doesn't necessarily need to be done like tomorrow. So we may hold off for 2 or 3 years and find the funds for that project through a separate set of bond sales that we do later on. All told, we have 7 years to sell all the bonds. So we have a lengthy window with which we can operate in, but every time you sell a set of bonds, you're incurring an issuance cost for those. And so that's another thing. We don't want to sell bonds 6 or 7 times because there's a fixed issuance cost every time we do that. We'd rather do it like twice, maybe 3 times at most. So we're also trying to make sure that we are responsible with the way that we sell those bonds for that reason as well. So there's a lot of science that goes into this in the finance department, but they do a great job with it. And I think we're getting close to a sale, but a lot of that will be determined through the budget process that we're already undergoing anyway.
I made that question sound way too simple for you to answer.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I do want our residents to know that there's a lot of thinking and science that goes into that, and all of it's with their best interest in mind. We're trying to
there is.
minimize the cost to the taxpayer.
Speaking of taxpayers, Big Thursday coming up tomorrow. During the day, PUC will consider water rates, an increase there. Want you to explain that, as well as at night. Tomorrow is the City Council will host a workshop on lead remediation. Just wondering if maybe we could wrap up there, or
Sure.
you can go on to anything else you might have.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing up the PUC issue. Unlike our water pollution control division, which covers sewer and stormwater, that's confined to the city of Newport, and the town of Middletown to some extent buys services from the water pollution control division, but they're not a producer, and so we're not under the constraints of the Public Utilities Commission when it comes to water and sewer. So we can set our own rates and charge Middletown what we deem fair for what we provide for them. It's not the case with water. Water is a legitimate public utility because it services multiple towns and the naval installation. So it services the southern part of Portsmouth, Middletown, the naval station, and the city of Newport. So much like an electrical grid that services many customers, so too does the Newport Water Division that produces all of our drinking water have to abide by the regulations from a public commission that makes sure that the interests of all the parties that it serves are fairly addressed. We know we haven't had any increases to our operating and maintenance costs for our water division since 2019. There were some rate increases in 2022 that were related to debt service for some of the bonds that were sold to help the water division continue its operations. But the actual raw operating and maintenance costs, those rates have not increased since 2019. So we have to catch up with 6 years of inflation, which if you go back to 2019, inflation has covered about 24%. In other words, the value of the dollar is worth 24% less than it was 6 years ago. Our rate increase, once we settled with not only the Public Utilities Commission, but the town of Middletown, the town of Portsmouth, and other ancillary agencies that use our water, was at 17.5%. So it's not going to feel like it when you get an increase to your bill, but the message to residents is that it could have been worse. You're actually getting a discount compared to what inflation has done over the past 6 years. Inflation was 24%. Your increase is only 17.5%. We're effectively losing ground to inflation with this settlement agreement. Now, there are lots of reasons for the settlement agreement with the Public Utilities Commission, how it came to be. It is absolutely exhaustive work that has been underway for well over a year. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of questions and answers with the Public Utilities Commission. You want to talk about an effort that really gets into the weeds? This is it. You could get a PhD just studying how the Public Utilities Commission works with municipalities. So it's very complex, and I'm really proud of our team. They've gotten to the point where they've reached a settlement with our other customers, and the commission, and that rate increase is going to go into effect probably in April or May at about 17.5%. So that's about an extra. I forget the press release, but I think it was about an extra $10 for someone who uses 5,000 gallons a month. So it's not huge.
62 or 127.44 per year. Yeah.
There you go. $10.62 a month if you use 5,000 gallons a month. So if you're conservative and you use 2,000 gallons a month, it'll only be 2/5 of that, or about $4 a month. So this is not going to. It'll be a little bit of an increase. You'll probably notice it, but it won't be anything enormous or gargantuan. And it is necessary to make sure that we maintain the level of service with our operations and maintenance going forward, to keep up with all the changes that have taken place in the industry over the last 6 years. Inflation chief among them. but also the science and technology has changed, and also the cost of chemicals, which we need at the water plants to make sure that our drinking water is pure and clean, have gone up considerably. Inflation of those particular elements is closer to 100%. So the cost of those chemicals has really risen dramatically. So we do need this increase to make sure that we're able to maintain an effective level of service for our customers. So this is not a money grab. This is good hard work with the Utilities Commission to come up with a fair number for our customers, and that's what this represents.
Something that goes right with that, with water, is pipes that lead into people's houses, and that takes place workshop tomorrow night. Newport City Council, Newport administration will be hosting about lead.
Yes, we'll talk. Rob Schultz has got about a 30-minute presentation talking about lead service lines and where we are not only with the lead service lines, but also he'll talk a little bit about the science between cast iron pipes and other types of fixtures that connect to lead service lines. Where if you want to make necessary changes to the cast iron pipes, for example, that have been there for 100 years, you have to do so in a way that avoids turbidity in the water, which might release lead from a lead service line that otherwise might not be released if you're not messing with the lines that connect to them. So there's a lot of science behind it. Rob can help explain that tomorrow, and also talk about the outlook for what we're doing over the next 10 years. Quite frankly, there's a 10-year mandate from the EPA to get this done, and we haven't identified the funding sources to complete that. We'll get some incremental funding, and we're going to prioritize the lead service lines that we work on. At first, it's going to be very heavily focused on schools and on sources of daycare, because we know that that's where children reside and spend some time, and children are the ones who are most affected by lead. Having said all of that, I want to make it clear to our residents that this is not a Flint, Michigan. They were dealing with something when they changed their water sources without the appropriate legwork that went into that. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 parts per billion of lead. The national action threshold is 10 parts per billion, and our water is well below that. We ultimately want to get to what's called lead zero, where there's absolutely no lead at all. But the action threshold at the federal level is 10 parts per billion, and Newport water, as it's tested from some of the residences and other businesses that are connected to lead service lines, is well below that. It leaves the plant lead free. It does pick up some, we're talking about like an eye drop in the size of a lake here. It does pick up some tiny particulate of lead along the way, but nowhere near anything that's considered a health hazard by the Environmental Protection Agency. Trying to get to lead zero, but the water is still safe. For those that do have those lead service lines, we encourage you to take advantage of the filter pitchers that were offered. Now, we can't pay for indefinite filter pitcher usage. We can give you a filter and a 6 month supply, or a pitcher and 6 month supply of filters. After that, the expectation is that the property owner takes care of it from that point forward. But we can give you that temporary peace of mind while a longer term solution is figured out if you want to have a filter. But again, well below the action threshold, the water is safe to drink. We aim to get to lead zero. It's just gonna take a lot of funding and to get there. And frankly, there's no identified source for a lot of that funding at this point.
There's a lot on my plate that we didn't get to, but we missed last month. But I encourage short-term rental portal. Newport's residential tax rate renewal period has begun. I encourage everybody to go to cityofnewport.com to read more about that, apply, just find out more. Was there anything else that we did not get to, Colin?
I think you covered all of it. I had a little cheat sheet here ready for you, but there's lots more we could cover. I do look forward next month to having Mike Carullo, my new deputy city manager, kind of sitting next to me, so I can introduce him to the broader public. I know he's a lot of people know who he is already. He's a mainstay in Newport. We're really excited to have him. But for those who haven't met him, I want to give the opportunity for folks to put a face to a name. He's a fantastic assistant, and I'm really excited to have him.
And he's an okay band member. He's an okay musician as well.
He's got lots of hidden talents.
That's it. Well, Colin, thanks for taking some extra time with us and for attacking all of that. And we will chat with you in March.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Ryan. Always appreciate the time.
All right. So that is City Manager Colin Kennedy. We appreciate him taking the time to join us today. If you missed any portion of this conversation, want to watch it again, all available on whatsupnewp.com. Thanks for watching.